Welcome to a new module in this course. I'm super excited for this one because we are going to understand some important concepts in JavaScript. These concepts will later help us provide functionalities to our app like fetching data and sending data to servers. Until now, in this course, we have been dealing with something called synchronous JavaScript, and now is the time to understand asynchronous JavaScript. You might not understand these terms now, but by the end of this section, you will know what they are and why these concepts are crucial to building real-world apps. So let's get started. This first lecture is going to serve us as an introduction to asynchronous code. So first, before we start working with real asynchronous code, we're going to mock everything using predefined timed intervals, meaning some of our actions are going to take a specific amount of time. In JavaScript, there is a variety of pre-made functions that allow you to execute chunks of code in timed intervals, even while other code in the program is being executed. Imagine you're coding a video game and need a function that could execute certain operations every millisecond, or a local clock that takes the amount of time a user has spent on your site. You'd probably help yourself with the following. In here, we have something known as setInterval. So, how can you use the setInterval? Well, the setInterval allows you to execute a chunk of code every time a specified amount of milliseconds passes. For example, let's console log hello world every 1000 milliseconds. That's 1 second. To do so, we would do something like this. setInterval, and that is a function, so we call it like so. That function accepts two different arguments. The first argument is a callback function, so we can define it like that. And then the second argument is the number of milliseconds. In here, let's do 1000, that's 1 second. Now, in this function, you can do whatever you like, and that something is going to be executed every 1 second. So now for the example, let's just do a string of hello world. Now, if we save that, as you can see, it starts counting hello world 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Every second we get a new console log. That's great and all, but how do you prevent an interval from going on forever? Or store one for that matter? Well, any interval can be stored as a full variable that can later be cleared using the clearInterval function. A more professional take on the example above would look like this. Const myInterval is a variable, and we're going to set that interval to be equal to this variable we had just here. This is an instant return, so we can remove these curly braces and simply do everything in one line. You remember arrow functions. So now this is our interval. We're going to set myInterval variable to be equal to this setInterval. Now what we can do is we can use a clearInterval function like so, and then pass in myInterval. Now, that's going to clear myInterval after a certain action. As you can see, in this case, it clears it immediately. The clear function is especially useful if you only want an interval to execute a certain amount of times, and clear it once a condition, such as millisecond counter getting to a certain value, is reached. Now we covered the setInterval and also the clearInterval. But there is also another really powerful function, and it's called setTimeout. So in here, I'm going to write a comment saying setTimeout, and let me explain how this works. The setTimeout function allows you to wait a certain amount of time before executing a chunk of code. Do note that other code outside of the timeout will continue execution as normal. The way it's used is identical to setInterval. So in this case, we can basically copy the same code right here, and then in here, we can call the setTimeout instead of setInterval. If we do that, let's see what happens. As you can see, the code first waits 1 second and then outputs this thing. Let's increase it to, for example, 5 seconds. In that way, it's going to be much more noticeable. I'm going to save it right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there should be our console log. There we go. We got it after 5 seconds. So if you want to do something after a certain amount of time, then you can use the setTimeout function. And as with the clearInterval, in this case, we have clearTimeout, just like so. So we can do the same thing to clear it like this, you just call the clear timeout and then pass in my interval. That's great. It's always a good practice to clear your intervals or timers. This is the first time you see JavaScript code that doesn't execute linearly from top to bottom. It is asynchronous. The code on the top can be executed after the code on the absolute bottom of the file. Let me show you that. We're gonna call our setTimeout at the top of our file. So I'm gonna delete everything and simply console log hello world at the top of our file. And then I'm gonna place another console log right there. I'm gonna say hello world and then there at the bottom. And this one is gonna be hello world at the top. So now if we call that, take a look. We get hello world at the bottom, and then only after 5 seconds are we going to get this one that is on the top. That is not being executed synchronously. If this was done synchronously, as it is always done, then this console log would be first. But in this case, first time ever, you're seeing how the asynchronous code works. Just after this lecture, we're going to go into much more depth in terms of asynchronous JavaScript. Stay tuned.